Recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law Podcast produced by Anson Evaluate. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law, and I'm joined here by my colleague Peter Wright, and we're just going to be running through some stories that have been coming up in the news this week. So I will pass over to Peter to introduce himself, and then we will get started.
Hi everyone, my name is Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law, and it's been a interesting couple of weeks just to start the year. A few things that I think we've already predicted that were going to happen are indeed starting to happen. So I just wanted to, it's great when you sort of predict in January we think things are going to happen, and sure enough, in February they're happening. So I will pass back to Amelia to take us into more detail.
Thanks, Peter. I even remember you coming into the office in January and saying, right, I think this story about TikTok will happen. And lo and behold, we're recording this on the 10th of February today, and it's looking like it's very logically going to happen. So essentially, the long and short of it is the US are looking to ban TikTok. So recently, the country has been kind of criticized for allowing the Chinese authorities to get admissions of users' records, and specifically here we're looking at 2/3 of American teenagers that are actually on TikTok. And so certain states have restricted the use of TikTok on personal phones and specifically authorized issued gadgets. But we are still seeing that 2/3 of American teenagers are on this platform, which, as we know and have talked about in the past, is controlled by the Chinese tech company, and therefore is susceptible to the Chinese government essentially peering over their shoulder. So I will pass over to Peter to go through this in a bit more detail.
Yes, thank you, Amelia. So this is quite interesting. We had President Biden giving his State of the Union address this week, and that, of course, received worldwide coverage. One of the main things was, Biden says he's going to clamp down on the tech firms, and they played the extract from the speech, which of course covers loads of different things in terms of what's happening in the US and giving that sort of briefing for the public. But what he said about tech was he didn't name any platform. And a lot of people said, oh, he's wanting to clamp down on Facebook and Twitter. But when you listen to his actual words, what he says is, we've allowed tech firms to be able to collect far more of our personal data than I think we intended. And, we're concerned about the data of our children being accessed and used and manipulated. And I think that's a fairly clear indicator that they are looking at TikTok, because that's the one that's being used by children. 2/3 of American teenagers are TikTok users. Its audience around the world is mainly teenagers and young adults. And there are concerns over the power of the algorithm in terms of how it serves potentially harmful information on TikTok to certain people. So, for example, you see one video that, for example, someone like Andrew Tate uploads, and then it'll serve many more videos of such a similar type, which could contain some rather disturbing content. Now, of course, then you come up against issues around freedom of speech and what people should or shouldn't be able to view online, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. But the point is, it's not just around content, it's also around the data that is gathered by this app. And just like the Facebook app, it's a very invasive app. It's looking at the data on your phone. It's taking information about GPS location information. It's looking at the different cell towers that your device may be connected to. It's looking at your device usage. It's wanting to work out what texts you're sending, what calls you're making, what your habits are online. It's a really invasive piece of software. As are other apps, as are Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and all of these other platforms. The point is that rather than it going to a tech mogul's office in California, this is going to a tech mogul's office in China, and that is the dividing line here. So we've already had a number of states in the US have turned around and said, we don't want this app to be installed on mobile devices that we give to our staff. So that's happened in a lot of states, from Texas to Oklahoma to Tennessee. The US Navy has said to its staff, if you could possibly not install this on our devices, on your devices, for reasons of giving away where our personnel and our ships and our hardware may be at any one time, we'd be incredibly grateful. Obviously, they wouldn't have used language quite of those types. But the point is that its use is being clamped down on by organisations at a federal and state level. And then when we get those fairly clear words from President Biden, and the fact that apparently draft legislation has already been placed before Congress, this could happen quite rapidly. And for those who are thinking, well, that's America, what's it got to do with the rest of us? I'd say look at the precedent set by what happened with Huawei. The US decided that it didn't want to have Huawei equipment involved in its provision of 4G and 5G broadband, and had concerns over how it was collecting data, and took steps a couple of years ago. And then it also turned around and pressured other countries, like the members of the Five Eyes network, which includes Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, to also stop using Huawei equipment. And after a little bit of kicking and screaming, eventually the UK followed suit. And I can see that if something happens in the same way here with TikTok being banned on grounds of privacy and security, it is not beyond the realms of possibility that you then get the US pushing other countries within the Five Eyes network, or more Western states generally, to stop using TikTok. And it might not even be Western states. Bear in mind that the US is also a member of the Quad in the Pacific, which includes Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. And you can also imagine them therefore pushing countries like Japan to similarly take steps against the use of this app. So there's the fact of what happens here in America could have significant impact around the world, and it will probably be rather unpopular as well, given that it's all teenagers and young adults that are using and sharing videos on this thing, and it is insanely popular due to the power of that algorithm and the fact it gives you more of what you want. There is a rumor that one reason why it hasn't been banned yet is because the US is wanting to see what other platforms can do to replace TikTok. So Instagram and Facebook have tried different things that haven't proved very popular. It wouldn't surprise me if Twitter turns around and steps into the void and thinks, yes, we can provide these sorts of services. You know, Elon Musk has talked about providing the Everything app. Does the Everything app that he's talking about mean it also provides a platform for the sharing of video content like this? So if TikTok is banned, who will step into the void then becomes quite an interesting question.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to our next story, we're kind of sticking with the whole algorithm and the AI theme here. So Google is now searching for a way to reassure people that it's still out in the front of the race for the best artificial intelligence technology. So they had released a bot called Bard, which was released on Twitter on Monday, and the bot was asked about what to tell a 9-year-old about discoveries from the James Webb Telescope. And unfortunately, they got it wrong. And this therefore led to knocking about 100 billion off the firm's market value. So this comes in response to the chat GPT AI that has been recently circulating on the internet. So I will pass over to Peter to go through this in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Amelia. This is quite an interesting story because we've already had ChatGPT taking the world by storm. Some schools in the UK have already said we're going to stop setting essays for homework because they're concerned that their students will just use the ChatGPT AI to produce a sort of bog standard essay and go, here you go, here's your essay. I'm not going to bother wasting my time writing 500 words of tedium. Let's face it, we've all been there. So, you know, Google here is looking to say, look, we've got something, and furthermore, it's bigger and better, and they've rolled out Bard as its solution. Problem is, it's not at the moment necessarily accurate. Could this be because of the data that is being put into it? Let's face it, everything that you read on the internet isn't necessarily true. Who knew? Sure enough, Bard was asked by a 9-year-old about what the James Webb Space Telescope had discovered, and it told the 9-year-old asking the question, it offered the response that the James Webb Telescope was the first to take pictures of a planet outside of the Earth's solar system, which sounds incredibly impressive, and it is, apart from the fact that that achievement was first hit in 2004 by the European Very Large Telescope. So almost 20 years ago. Not quite as earth-shattering as it sounds. So, and sure enough, the world's astronomers were fairly quick to make this point clear on Twitter. So, not great for Google when it rolls out this platform to great fanfare, and then to find that actually it isn't quite as accurate or as good a product as had been at first hoped. Ironically, just while you were bringing up this story, Amelia, we know that it has had an impact on Alphabet's share price. It knocked off 100 billion off the firm's market value, $100 billion, 82 billion pounds, and it's falling again today. We're recording this on the 10th of February, and my system has just told me that as well as the UK FTSE declining today, so is Google. So it's still on the slide, unfortunately. Now, we can't necessarily turn around and say this is entirely due to Bard. Google and many of the other tech firms are currently struggling because they were very highly valued during the pandemic, and they've been losing value since then, when people have actually stopped using their platforms quite so much. So everyone from Tesla to Twitter to Facebook to Google are all having to make savings, and a lot of that's coming through from reducing their headcount, and it's a response to the fact that their market capitalization is falling. But clearly here, this hasn't helped Google at all, and they'll be wanting to make sure, but given that clearly the future is going to be platforms will want to say they've got a good, sophisticated AI available. I think it's also just worth mentioning here ChatGPT and its applications. People are already saying, this is it. This is going to take all of our jobs. We may as well just give up now. It's not that bad or not that apocalyptic as usual. I've heard lawyers saying this will take away our work, and I've heard that constant refrain since the day I qualified in 2004, and it still comes around and around and around. And all it means is, if anything, tools like this will allow lawyers to be more efficient. You'll be able to handle more matters, be able to churn out more work using tools like this, so you can actually look after more clients. Who knew? If you can do things more efficiently, reduce the fees, you can then bring in more clients to bring in more fees. Who knew? So there is a story to tell here, and it's a positive one. And also the fact that you will have competition then, Google will improve Bard from this rather inauspicious start. It will improve. And no doubt ChatGPT will continue to evolve, and other platforms will come along. It won't just be these, there'll be others. Apple, no doubt, will debut something. We've already got Amazon's well-known platform, which will continue to evolve. So, there's going to be loads of different systems which will develop, which will probably have strengths and weaknesses in different areas too. So it could be you'll use ChatGPT for one thing, you'll use Bard for something else. Who knows? But this is merely the beginning. There'll be more and more of these sorts of platforms, and they'll have multifarious uses, no doubt.
Thanks, Peter. So moving slightly away from AI now. So we are next talking about JD Sport. So JD Sports is contacting customers who have been affected by a cyber attack that may have exposed their personal details. So this incident has impacted around 10 million people who placed orders between November 2018 and October 2020. Customer names, delivery, billing, email addresses, phone numbers, and the last 4 digits of their bank cards were potentially exposed here. And this doesn't just include JD shoppers. It also looks at shops included in the JD group, including Size, Millets, Black, Scots, and the Millet Sports brands. The sportswear company does not believe the account passwords were accessed, and it has assured people that their full payment and card details were not held. However, they are warning people to watch out for scam emails, calls, and texts. I mean, this is a fairly big story here, and across a good 2 years, specifically when people were ordering a lot of things online due to the pandemic. So I will pass over to Peter to really dig deep here.
Thanks, Amelia. Yes, this is at first glance, it just looks like, oh, this is another hacking story. So what? But the point here is the fact that it's the sheer volume of people over a prolonged period of time from November 2018 to October 2020. And it's the fact that we're talking about names and payment information, you know, the last 4 digits of bank cards, emails. And again, you might think, well, so what? But the trouble is that chains like this, in particular, you know, Blacks and JD, they send out a lot of marketing collateral. I hike every weekend, so I tend to buy hiking boots on a fairly regular basis from Blacks. The fact that those hiking boots fall apart after 6 months should probably tell me I should start shopping somewhere else. But the point is that I get, therefore, from Blacks every week, oh, here are our offers. Would you like to get a new fleece? Would you like to get yet another pair of boots? You know, they send this stuff through, and oh, this all looks very nice. And of course, there's then the opportunity to then, they want you to click through to their website and buy something, having seen something on the email. Now that I know that this hack has happened, I'm going to be very suspicious of every single Blacks email that I get. I certainly won't be following any links through to their website. And I will certainly be somewhat reticent about, because indeed they've got that. Who knows what sort of emails you could get through from it? But you know, I have bought stuff from Blacks during that period. I'm probably one of the 10 million people affected, and therefore it just makes you even more cautious about ever opening and responding to any email, the provenance of which you can't be certain. Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, it says, JD Sports says we take the protection of customer data extremely seriously, and we are sorry this has happened. Well, that's reassuring. You know, the point here is that a number of organisations end up being hit, and it's very often high profile like this, and they come up with the platitudes of, oh, we did take our customer data seriously, but you end up thinking, well, if you did, this wouldn't have happened, would it? So it's a constant reminder to say that really, I don't think you can, whenever you know, boards are discussing this sort of thing, and you're being asked, should we spend more money on our cybersecurity? The answer is yes. Yet the number of times I end up either hearing about discussions at board level or being involved in discussions at board level with different organisations and trying to get expenditure on keeping data safe and indeed having an integrated cybersecurity plan across a large organisation like JD Sport is incredibly difficult. And it's also difficult when you then get pushback from people who are saying, well, I don't know why we should spend this. So this is yet another example of why you should, and why organizations like this should be taking every measure they can to keep their data safe, rather than trying to cut corners, or, as is often the case with a company like JD and covering many other brands after mergers and acquisitions. Ideally, you want to have good integrated systems, not a hodgepodge of legacy systems that are vulnerable to exploitation.
Thanks, Peter. So moving from outsider threats to an insider threat in our next story here. So a former employee of breakdown service company RAC has pled guilty and been fined for stealing the data of victims of road traffic accidents. I mean, even just in that one sentence, there are a lot of red flags. I mean, you're preying on innocent victims here that have been in road traffic accidents that may have been exceptionally serious, and this guy has been taking their data. So this guy was working for RAC as a customer solutions specialist, and over a single month in 2019, the RAC had received 21 complaints from suspicious drivers who received calls from claims management companies following accidents in which the RAC had assisted. A review of the individuals that had accessed these claims had found that this individual was the only employee to have accessed all 21. An internal RAC investigation later reported a suspicious behaviour, and this includes taking photos of the computer screen with this person's phone. So a search warrant was issued by the ICO, and they seized 2 phones and a customer receipt of £12,000. And essentially here, the individual was taken to court, and He was in breach of Section 170 of the Data Protection Act 2018, and he was fined £5,000 and ordered to pay a victim surcharge and court costs. So there's a fair amount to unpack there, so I will pass over to Peter.
Thanks, Amelia. I think the first thing to say here is that this individual's been very lucky to avoid prison. There have been individuals who've been responsible for insider breaches like this in the past, or for the known manipulation of data that they've had access to during the course of their employment, who have been imprisoned. The only thing that's kept this individual out of prison is probably the fact that this is probably a first offence, previous good character, and courts do take account of that. But in this instance, this is a really serious breach, because when you've been in a road accident, obviously that is fairly, usually you've got people who will have then incurred injuries, could be medical bills. Certainly the vehicle is going to be requiring repair, and this is feeding into the industry that exists of fraudulent claims in relation to road vehicle accidents, which has been growing over the years. So it feeds into everything from accidents being staged, or accidents happening where one of the parties is deliberately driving a vehicle into another vehicle to occasion an accident that they can then make a claim for and claim thousands of pounds. And this is exactly that sort of thing. So in this instance, okay, they've then found out about these accidents. So then people could potentially call up, impersonate a claims management company, and potentially then extort information out of the people who've been involved in these road traffic accidents, saying, oh, we are a reputable firm of claims handlers, when they're not, or even impersonating a solicitor, something like that. And it's funny enough, I mean, Amelia, you and I are both discussing the fact that we've both been on the ends of calls where people have said, oh, hello, you've been in a road accident. And for both of us at the time, we've been able to turn around and say, A, no, we've not been in an accident, and B, neither of us owned a car at that time either. So it was quite clear that, they were clearly just fishing in a very clear and real sense of the word. But in this instance, you're targeting people who have been in accidents, and their guard will be down. And if someone then calls up and says, oh, your information's been passed to us by the RAC, you might not stop and think, well, has it? Particularly if sometimes the wheels can turn slowly, and it can take time for an organisation like the RAC to then potentially feed information regarding serious accidents through to one of their panel solicitors to start advancing a injury claim on behalf of a party who's been in a road accident. So this is really serious, and the thing here as well is that you've got in screens that have been accessed by this individual. He's then taken those shots, screen information on their phone. That's the sort of activity as well that I think any organisation needs to be very mindful of. Indeed, we've worked with some clients where we've said, look, you shouldn't really allow your staff to have mobile devices on the office floor, because you're handling sensitive information. And when your staff are working, they have no reason to be using their phone. So they can arrive with the phone, they can put it into a locker, they do their shift, and then they collect it at the end. And in this instance, where you've got RAC staff who are working with those who have in a call centre dealing with people who are in road accidents or in a vulnerable situation, stuck at the side of the road having broken down. That's the sort of scenario where actually you'd be wanting to think, well, do our staff need to have their mobile phones on them during a shift, or should they actually be leaving their devices outside in a securely until it's then collected? And when you're handling this sort of sensitive data, arguably that should be the case. But certainly if you've got staff in this sort of scenario and you're in financial services or litigation for it, or insurance, you might, for example, want to consider a similar step.
Thanks, Peter. So that was our final stories for today. A big thank you again to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this podcast, and we will hopefully be back soon. And in the meantime, if you want to listen to us, we are on Spotify, Amazon Music, and essentially anywhere you can find podcasts. And we're even on YouTube as well. So if you miss us in the meantime, go ahead and follow any links to those. And we hope to see you again soon.